It's been 9 months since the start of the war in Gaza, and there is renewed optimism for a potential hostage-for-ceasefire deal after Hamas dropped a key demand to end the war for good. It's day 275 of the war in Gaza, and the now lower-intensity warfare is ongoing. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz reports.
The families of the hostages staged a major demonstration last night, marking 9 months of captivity for the 116 hostages, living and dead, still held in Gaza. Over the weekend, Hamas gave initial approval for a U.S.-backed proposal for a phased truce and hostage exchange deal in Gaza, dropping a key demand that Israel give upfront commitment for a complete end to the war. A key stumbling block remains Hamas's demand for written guarantees from mediators that Israel will continue to negotiate a permanent ceasefire deal once the first phase of a ceasefire goes into effect. The compromise has set the stage for further talks towards pausing the war and bringing home the hostages, but all sides are cautioning that a deal is still not guaranteed.
There is a deal that's on the table right now, and we are here to support the government in every which way and call it to make sure that the gaps that still exist are overcome and that we reach a deal to get everybody back home as soon as possible.
9 months typically symbolizes life and new beginnings. And after 9 months, all of the hostage families, the 120, see a deal on the table. A deal that we believe is good for Israel. We think that it is sufficient also for Hamas that returns with a positive answer.
Meanwhile, the now lower-intensity war in Gaza is ongoing. Day 275 of the war, the IDF is operating in Gaza City's Shejia neighborhood, where they have located long-range rockets and demolished terror tunnels. Troops from the 7th Armored Brigade are attempting to prevent Hamas from reestablishing itself in the area months after the IDF's initial operation in and around Gaza City. The army continued to push forward in Shejia, eliminating numerous terrorists, terror infrastructure, and weaponry. The forces located underground shafts and confiscated weapons and long-range rockets, indicating a renewed attempt by the enemy to establish a base in the area.
Well, after the news Hamas had accepted the initial stage of a hostage deal proposed by the U.S., thousands of Israelis have been protesting, marking 9 months of captivity for the more than 100 hostages who remain. Joining us to discuss the hostage situation is Daniel Sheck, the Director of Diplomacy at the Hostage and Missing Families Forum. Daniel, thank you for joining us today. I want to start by getting your take on the most recent development with Hamas, claiming they are now willing to drop the demand to end the war. What's your take on this?
Just to make sure that everyone understands, the Forum of Families of Hostages is not part of the negotiating process. We're not privy to the inside information of what is going on in the negotiations. So we are sort of, how should I put this, concerned spectators. So yes, I would describe the atmosphere among families as hopeful and cautious. It does seem like Hamas has made an important step, and I'm hopeful that the Israeli side is receptive enough for this step to bring us over the line.
Now, you mentioned that the Hostage and Missing Families Forum has been a little bit kept in the dark about this issue. We know already that Hamas has repeatedly balked at hostage deals, even at points when sometimes Israel was willing to compromise. Do you think, is it the opinion of the majority of these families involved, that Israel will be willing to make the necessary compromises on these issues to bring home at least some of our hostages?
I really, very honestly, I don't know the answer to that. If you follow the news reports during the day after the sort of uplifting feeling yesterday that things are finally moving forward, there were conflicting reports about, on the one hand, a certain skepticism in the international community about Israel's willingness. On the other hand, some more positive reports saying that the negotiators are out to finalize a deal. In the end of the day, certainly at this late stage of a very, very, very long negotiation, the one thing that makes the difference is that both sides are really committed to success at the same time. Because as you mentioned, there were moments during these very long 7 months of negotiations where the impression was that one side was more committed than the other. It needs to be concerted. And then suddenly all the nitty-gritty of a comma here and a word there suddenly seem very easy to resolve.
Now, you're dealing with the diplomatic issue, and I think one of the challenges, although you've noted quite importantly that you are not part of these direct negotiations, nor are the families of hostages, but I'm wondering what your opinion is on the reservations that Hamas has said that they have. They're looking for a written guarantee for the next stages of ending a Gaza war, for some kind of permanent ceasefire. What is your take on this? Do you believe that this is achievable objective? Of course, it's not just in Israel's hands on this issue. They're also looking for guarantees from other partners, United States or other nations.
I have enough trouble understanding Israel's position. I'm certainly not the right person to go into the head of the negotiators on the part of Hamas. They are definitely not the easiest negotiating partner. Volatile, changing, not unanimous. You never know if you have a yes from one person that it will be the same for the other one, and vice versa. So yeah, both sides approach this negotiation with a huge amount of mistrust, and it's understandable. We are in the middle of a very, very bloody and very, very cruel moment of war. So again, the question is the political and the sort of the fundamental willingness to close this chapter of the war. My impression is that Israel is there. Certainly the military is. I think most of the negotiators. But in the end of the day, it's a decision by the government and the prime minister. And maybe the fact that Hamas, if it turns out to be true, does retreat from this very, very difficult demand that everything should pause and halt, even as a preamble to any kind of deal. If that is no longer the case, then it may be an indication that Hamas wants to end this too, one way or another.
Absolutely. Daniel, we are out of time, but I want to thank you for your insights, and we will continue to hope for the best, for some kind of deal to bring our hostages home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the IDF saw heavy weekend action in the north and in Samaria. A Hezbollah officer was eliminated 100 kilometers north of the border. And today, Hezbollah has been striking the lower Galilee and northeastern Israel with over 150 attacks just since this morning. In addition, Palestinian terrorists were killed in Jenin. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz followed the developments.
Hezbollah fired a rocket barrage on the lower Galilee this morning, claiming to have targeted an Israeli military base near Tiberias in response to the assassination of one of its members in an IDF drone strike in northeastern Lebanon yesterday. The rocket attack seriously wounded an Israeli civilian near the town of Kfar Zeitim. In the north, the Air Force has been pounding Hezbollah sites after rocket attacks near Kiryat Shmona injured 2 soldiers. Aircraft targeted several Hezbollah launching and observation sites identified in different areas of the Upper Galilee. The air defense units successfully intercepted some incoming rockets. Additionally, fighter jets targeted a Hezbollah military structure in the area of Markaba in Lebanon. The IDF killed a key member of Hezbollah air defense in a drone strike. Maitam al-Attar was targeted while driving in northeastern Lebanon, some 100 kilometers north of the Israeli border. Al-Attar spent time in Iran and was involved in helping the Lebanese terror group procure Iranian weapons. In Samaria, 7 Palestinian gunmen, including members of a cell behind a deadly roadside bombing last week, were killed in Jenin. The IDF said troops from the Duvdevan Commando Unit and the Kfir Brigade's Haruv Reconnaissance Unit raided Jenin following intelligence provided by the Shin Bet on the location of the cell that killed Captain Alon Sagi and wounded 16 other soldiers on June 27th. The special forces encircled the building where the roadside bombers were hiding and carried out a tactic known as pressure cooker that involves escalating the volume of fire directed at a building to force suspects to come out. The pair were eventually killed in the clashes. A third member of the roadside bomb cell was killed earlier by border police. Separately, amid the operation, troops clashed with other terror operatives, and a drone strike was carried out against the cell of 4 gunmen that were identified in the area.
In medieval times, blood libels ignited pogroms that shattered our people. And now echoes of these lies persist in new blood libels. On college campuses, online, in the media, and halls of power, Jewish communities are facing this haunting echo of history once again. That's why we must speak out and make our voices heard. Today, there is only one organization that truly brings together Jewish communities from more than 100 countries and effectively elevates the voices of young leaders standing on the front lines in this battle for our survival: the World Jewish Congress.
Over the weekend, the Islamic Republic of Iran held the runoff election to replace former President Ibrahim Raisi, who recently died in a helicopter crash. The 2 remaining candidates of the initial 4 were Masoud Pezeshkian and Saeed Jalili. Jalili being perceived as more closely aligned with the mullahs. In the end, Pezeshkian won the election and will be the new president. However, Iranians are not charmed. The majority of the people did not vote in the elections out of protest, as under the Islamic regime's own constitution, there are no real elections. All 4 candidates were ultimately chosen by the Ayatollah himself and would not be permitted to run if they were not approved by the IRGC. It's estimated that only 10% of the public participated in the sham elections. Iranians took to social media on Election Day to share photos of empty voting booths nationwide with trending hashtags of election circus. Unfortunately, it seems the Western media did not get the memo from the Iranian people. Many are reporting that perhaps there will be changes in Iran due to the new presidency of Pezeshkian, whom they've dubbed a reformist. However, this could not be further from the truth. This is a tactic of the regime itself. Firstly, Pezeshkian has spent 45 years in the service of the Islamic Republic. He implemented gender apartheid policies before they were even legally mandated, and has proudly said that he is IRGC. Secondly, the position of the president in Iran holds no power to change the system. The entire structure of the Islamic Republic is designed to serve only the Ayatollah and give him the ultimate, what they call divine, power. No so-called reformist can change this. Finally, the language of hardliner versus reformist is a false dichotomy invented by the regime itself for the West to promote the idea that they can negotiate with a more moderate leader, despite the fact he's not moderate at all and is a puppet of the Ayatollah. This is strategic for the regime, especially if they anticipate a future Trump presidency, which will almost certainly see a crackdown of sanctions. I urge the West and Western media to listen to the Iranian people and not play into the hands of the Islamic Republic. The fact is, there is no reforming the regime. Only regime change will bring freedom to Iran. Well, elections are really taking place all over the world, it seems, as the French held their elections today. And this week, the UK also chose a new path forward. Let's take a look at the UK's election results and what it might mean for Israel.
As of this morning, the UK officially has a new prime minister after the UK Labour Party wins big in the elections. New Prime Minister Keir Starmer will take over following a Labour victory of 412 seats in the House of Commons, while the Conservatives saw a loss of nearly 250 seats nationwide. Starmer said in his first comments as Prime Minister that his government will be one of service to the people. But when it comes to Israel, the Labour Party has faced criticism for not being critical enough of Israel on the war on Gaza. Starmer, whose wife is Jewish, has been fairly consistent in support for Israel, in contrast to some of his peers in the party, like the notorious Jeremy Corbyn, who was forced out as leader of the Labour Party over anti-Semitism scandals. However, the new Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has already stated the government will take a more balanced approach to the Israel issue, while citing statistics from Hamas.
I want to get back to a balanced position. on Israel, Gaza. We've been very clear that we want to see a ceasefire, and we have been calling for that since the end of last year. We want to see those hostages out. But when we see the tremendous loss of life, 38,000 people, women and children, the fighting has to stop.
On Saturday, thousands of anti-Israel protesters gathered to demand the UK government call out what they called a genocide in Gaza and pressure the new UK Prime Minister. This follows months of anti-Israel marches in which support for terrorism was on display, chants for genocide and Jews were routinely heard, and in some cases anti-Semitic violence broke out. Starmer's initial statement, however, made no mention of the war in Gaza.
Well, as discussions are taking place globally about the new UK government and what their policies will be, here to speak with us about just that is former Israeli ambassador to the UK and chair of the Abba Evan Institute at Reichman University, Mark Regev. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. To start, what do the UK elections mean for the future of the UK-Israel relationship?
I think it's very significant because Starmer has a whopping majority, has 2/3 of the seats in Parliament, and he's got 5 years. And I think you're going to see over the coming months the emergence of an international statesman. I mean, ultimately, we know that President Macron is term limited and he's not doing well politically at home, and he will finish his term there in France in the not too distant future. Scholz in Germany, the chancellor, is going through a difficult time politically. We saw in the recent elections of for the European Union, for the European Parliament, we saw Scholz's party, the Social Democrats, coming in third place behind the radical right and the conservative right. But Starmer comes in now, and I think he's going to be filling a vacuum. And I think we can expect him to emerge as a significant international player. And therefore, for us as Israelis, his attitude to our country is crucially important. First of all, if I was listening very careful to all of Starmer's remarks on the day following his victory, and he kept saying repeatedly that Labour had to change so it could be a party of government. And I think that's his way of saying Labour had to move on and discard the Corbyn legacy, the legacy of his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, who was, as you know, very radical on a host of issues. And on Israel, he was hostile and even accused widely of anti-Semitism. And so I think Starmer understands that him being elected prime minister is a direct function of his rejection of Corbynism. And if Corbynism was anti-Israelism, he's moving in a different direction. Now, I'd remind you that the two previous British Labour prime ministers, that's Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, were both perceived as being friends of Israel, friends of the Jewish people, friends of the Jewish state. Will Starmer fit into that legacy, or will he be something else? We have to wait to see. But because he has so strongly divorced himself from the Corbynist legacy, there is room, I believe, as I said, for cautious optimism.
And now when it comes to counterterrorism, do you think that Starmer's government will work with Israel and the U.S. against organizations like the Houthis and other terror groups?
Yes, I think from what I understand of his positions, that he's got a very strong position in fighting terrorism. And I think the British have been part of American efforts in the Middle East, as you say correctly, fighting the Houthis in Yemen, but also part of the international coalition to fight ISIS in Iraq and Syria and so forth. Israel has very strong security relationships with the United Kingdom, and I expect them to continue under Starmer. Having said that, there is pressure within his own Labour Party, maybe to sort of tone down security cooperation in Israel. Some of his parliamentarians, his Labour backbenchers, have actually called for the end of British weapons coming to the IDF in response primarily to the war in Gaza. And it'll be very interesting for me to see how Starmer responds to those pressures. I mean, if one is very frank, foreign policy wasn't a big part of the British election. Foreign policy was hardly mentioned, around the ballot box. it was all about renewing Britain internally, economic development, immigration, and so forth. But foreign policy wasn't an issue, except for Gaza. There we saw a situation where in Labour strongholds, Labour losing or doing better than expected because of independent candidates who were pushing the Gaza issue. And this, I think, was particularly in areas where you've got a large population of British Muslims who felt strongly on the Gaza issue. Jeremy Corbyn, who Starmer threw out of the Labour Party when he, changed the Labour Party's direction, he stood as an independent in his own seat and won, stating also that Gaza is a crucial issue for him. And there were other examples. There are 4 or 5 seats where independent pro-Gaza candidates actually defeated the Labour candidate.
Well, we are out of time, but I want to thank you, Mark Regev, for joining us and for your insights on this issue.
My pleasure.
Israel's Beilinson Hospital was treating the country's first known living patient with a rare brain-eating amoeba. The 26-year-old man's condition rapidly deteriorated, leading to a critical diagnosis and intensive care until today, when his death was announced. ILTV's editor-in-chief, Maayan Hoffman, has the full story.
Israel's Beilinson Hospital announced the death of the first living patient in Israel with Naegleria fowleri, also known as the brain-eating amoeba, which can cause a severe central nervous system infection. The hospital had been treating him since last week. Last Tuesday, the 26-year-old male patient was admitted with symptoms of fever, headache, and vomiting. His condition quickly worsened, showing neurological symptoms. After comprehensive tests, doctors made the rare diagnosis. By Wednesday evening, he was transferred to Beilinson's neurological intensive care unit. Dr. Tamar Gutzman, head of the infectious disease unit at Hasharon Hospital and the microbiology laboratory at Beilinson Hospital, explained that this disease is so rare it is often only identified post-mortem. In fact, the only other case known in Israel was in August 2022 at Pariah Hospital, but it was unfortunately discovered post-mortem. This very rare amoeba is only diagnosed in 10 cases per year in the United States. The patient had been traveling in Israel and visiting natural water sources. The amoeba, which thrives in warm waters between 35 and 42 degrees Celsius, is usually harmless to swimmers. However, in rare instances, it can cause infection. Beilinson Hospital senior physician in the neurological intensive care unit, Dr. Ayana Devere, said the team was working around the clock to save the young man. However, on Sunday afternoon, the hospital unfortunately announced his death. The hospital will do additional research into the incident.
The IDF soldier in the center of the iconic 1967 Six-Day War photo at the Western Wall has passed away. The depiction of fresh-faced paratrooper Yitzhak Yifat and fellow soldiers became a powerful symbol of one of the most significant moments in Israeli history. Aged 24 at the time of the photo, Yifat went on to become a doctor and is survived by 3 daughters and 10 grandchildren. He was 81 years old. The photo was taken by legendary Jerusalem photographer David Rubinger as the soldier stood in silent awe in front of the recaptured Western Wall after the battle for Jerusalem. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Partly cloudy skies are expected tonight around the country, with temperatures reaching lows of around 23 degrees Celsius or 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomorrow, we should be expecting mostly sunny skies and hot temperatures, set to reach highs of 34 degrees Celsius or 93 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels, subscribe to our newsletter, and explore our website, iltv.tv. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Emily Schrader. Be well, and thank you for watching.